Aloha, everybody. Hi. Welcome to Chuck Furuya Uncorked. I just decided to change it up a little bit.
Hey there.
So this week we have a very special guest, Michael Winterbottom, sommelier of Senia.
How's it?
Yep. And of course, joining us is the Gram Som, Ariana Suchia.
Hello. Howdy.
So for all you viewers, Michael Winterbottom is a very, very talented individual. I mean, professional, I should say. And the more I get to know about him, the more incredible I find the depth of knowledge with foods, with wines.
And the passion for it as
but
well.
But also how he thinks about it, how he dissects it in order to make it digestible and therefore applicable to him. That it's an amazing feat how he's able to absorb it. And he's very unique from many of the other professionals we've talked about because of those reasons. So just to let you know, Michael is CIA trained, the Culinary Institute of America. So his background really was in cooking, you know. And then somewhere along the line, when I first met him, he was working at Kalapawai Market over here in Kailua. And then the next thing I noticed that he became the sommelier at Senia Restaurant, you know, the hotshot restaurant downtown Honolulu. And, you know, quite a remarkable run there. And, you know, their wine and food programs were progressive and, you know, really interesting and unique. So I think he's an ideal person to talk to on this whole subject. And what we asked of him today was that he wanted to cook something. He wanted to cook something, and then we would have a kind of like a wine and food workshop of trying different kind of wines to go with his dish and to see the hows and whys and see what works, what doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera. So, Michael, let's start off with you first describing your dish and why you know, what's it all about?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. We started off with beef Daub, which is a really classic Southern French beef stew. It is essentially the foundation of what a general beef stew is. And the process kind of starts by soaking the beef in wine. So I took this beef, which was chuck.
Yes. I like beef.
And cheek.
Should have saw that one coming.
So it was chuck and cheek.
I am chic. You're right.
And I literally soaked it in Southern French Grenache for 24 hours.
Grenache or Mourvèdre?
Grenache. Well, later we finished it with Mourvèdre, but we soaked it in Grenache, which is a kind of a softer red wine. It's got kind of a juicy flavor to it without a lot of tannins. And there was nothing else, just that and the wine.
So it's marinating for 24 hours with the wine. Any other ingredients that you put?
No,
just the wine to break it down?
Just the wine.
Okay.
Some people do add aromatics to it, garlic, herbs, but I didn't want to incorporate flavors like that into the meat before it cooks. I sometimes can think that can convey a lot of that flavor, especially with alcohol being the kind of transportive way of doing that. So just the wine. We took it out and we patted it dry, which is really crucial. You can't sear meat really deeply with it being wet. It's got to be nice and dry. So we seared it, not all at once in the pot. It took me about 2.5 hours to sear all the meat properly because if you put too much of it in the pot, it'll all steam and it will never brown properly.
Oh, okay.
And we just deglazed it with a little bit of water every time. And I took all that and I soaked that for another day without cooking it. I just seared it, took all the water, glazed it, and then we soaked it overnight in that. And then the next day, I actually cooked it. And what we did was we added some Niçoise olives. Not much, probably about 15 to 20 olives for what was about a 2-gallon recipe. We added cinnamon, just a cinnamon stick for some aromatics to splice into that.
And the cinnamon stick really carries through. I had a casual bowl before this episode, but you can smell it. Like that's one of those strong aromatics that I'm getting just from smelling.
I was surprised actually how subtle and strong it came because I didn't think 1 stick was enough, but I was worried that 2 would be too much.
No, I think the 1 stick was a perfect amount.
Yeah. And then we added orange zest as well.
That's the thing that I can really I get right off the bat was the orange, the uplifting orange-esque edge. You know, it makes it not so braised and not so.
It makes you keep going back for more.
It's not so glutinous, you know.
Yeah.
Between using the red wine and the orange zest,
it's got kind of that uplift character to it. We literally just did 2 peels of it and threw it in there. So really not much, because a little bit goes a long way with orange zest, and it's also bitter, so we have to kind of worry about that as well.
Yeah, you have to do it by peel.
That's by feel, folks, for those of you who don't speak Chuck.
So, Michael, this is a takeoff on Julia Child's recipe?
Yes, this is about 90% Julia Child's recipe. The only thing I added was mushrooms, was I took honshimeji, or beach mushrooms, and then some cremini. Not much. I just took 1 little bunch of beach mushrooms and about half a pound of cremini.
Was that to add a earthiness? Did you have a joke coming or something?
No, I'm just saying he did it because he's a fun guy.
There
I am
we
a
go.
I
fun
told
guy.
him to put more inside. He goes, no, there isn't mushroom in there.
There it is. So you were telling us a really awesome background on this type of fare, basically coming from the Mediterranean basin. Is that how this Daub was inspired, or?
So Daub is actually the cooking vessel that they use to make this. Usually, almost always it's ceramic, and it has a handle, something that can be put directly into the fire or a fireplace, and that's how they generally cook it. So it's named after that vessel.
It's kind of like a Dutch oven.
No.
Okay,
You know,
perfect.
so you're cooking it inside the spit. You're cooking it with coals. You're not cooking in the oven, Neil, in the original days, you know?
So a little bit of smokiness from that fire makes its way in there. So we incorporated that smokiness via bacon.
Oh, okay.
But actually, I poached the bacon for about 5 minutes before I threw it in there, because I wanted to release a lot of that smoke before it goes into the stew.
So it translates throughout the whole, like it's still present, right?
Yeah. If we were to just throw bacon in there, I think it would have been too strong. So we softened that flavor. It's really all about everything that we add to a dish has a really strong presence on its own right, and we either need to accentuate that or we need to play it back a little bit.
So balance.
To balance it, exactly.
So just a different take on, a beef stew, beef bourguignon, something like that, but from its roots is in Provence.
Provence, yeah.
So
And I would like to say, for those of you who are interested in trying this at home, it's a perfect holiday festive dish. I think that the little bit of cinnamon, even the orange zest, adds this very nice holiday character. It's really nice and hearty. You know, us Hawaii people, we love beef stew. So this rendition of it, that works perfectly. And, for those of you in the mainland it's approaching winter, I know y'all getting cold up there. This is what's going to warm you up for sure.
We also tended to use more winter vegetables, so I use parsnip and carrots as the only vegetables. And parsnips has this beautiful nuttiness to it and a sweetness that I think carrots don't quite have. And the carrots have this savory aspect to them that really picks up more of the seasoning. But the big thing about this is we roasted them separate. So we put some carrots and some parsnip in the stew. And when it's cooking, it breaks down and actually adds a little bit more body, a little bit more viscosity
To the
to the
sauciness of it,
yeah,
right?
it kind of
Exactly.
melts.
Melts.
Exactly. And then the rest we actually roasted separately with just thyme, butter, salt, pepper.
It's about time.
At least this time around. So we roasted it separate because it kind of keeps its body to it. And before we heated the whole dish up, I just put the vegetables on top, heated the stew in the daub. And once it was kind of bubbling and simmering, that's when we folded the vegetables in. That way they kind of keep their structure to them and keep it really basic. I literally cooked it for about 40 minutes at about 400 degrees with just butter, thyme, salt, pepper. That was it.
So realistically, although it takes several days, you're doing a little bit out of a time. So at the time, so it's not overwhelming. It's something people could still make at home, correct?
Yeah, you don't have to take 4 days to do this. I will say that you need at least 6 hours of soaking the meat in the red wine. At least. If you have a day to do it, that's great. If not, you can cook the whole thing from start to finish, through and through, one go.
Well, a little TLC and a little tender loving care never hurt anyone either. It
That's
really
true.
sings in this dish, that's why.
Well, when you marinate in red wine, it helps to break down the proteins and the fat inside the meat. So that's it. Essentially tenderizes the meat some, The other thing he did, which he didn't mention, was right before bringing it here and serving it, he took some red wine, went like this, and just left it raw and just mixed it in. So it gives it this freshness and also makes it more little more wine friendly.
Wine friendly.
I wish I could have given you one before and one after, because it was an insane change. It really was. It wasn't all that much of wine that we added to it, but what was really bass tony and really, really like strong and broad shouldered became a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more
It opened
floral.
up a little bit.
Opened up, absolutely, and it softened.
Yeah.
Just like when humans drink wine.
It's true.
So, Michael, in a previous podcast, my wife made bolognese, and she did 2 different versions. And one was with one wine that was more savory, and the other one she made with Lacrima de Moro d'Alba, which is a more aromatic red grape. What a different... No, I'm sorry. She used the Brochetto, El Gochetto from La Pergola.
The
very aromatic.
Nice. Wow.
What a difference in the dish, just based upon the small amount of wine that she, tempered it with. It's amazing, and that's why those people that are using the cheap wine at $2.49 a bottle, it affects your dish.
Absolutely. And people don't realize it. And, if you're buying a bottle for yourself and you want to just add a little bit to the dish and finish the rest, have a glass or 2, I think that works beautifully together.
We do that at Senia with specific dishes for the tasting menu, but not all that often. Very specifically when they want red wine into it, I will give them...
When they incorporate that.
Yeah, I'll give them the wine that we're either pairing with it or from at least the same region if it's in the same price range, but not all the time.
That's a very thoughtful thing to think about, when you're using food and wine together. It's not just whatever red, whatever white, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into tasting the 3 different wines. So while they start to taste, let me just review the wines with you very quickly. From the glass on the left to the glass on the right. The lighter colored, the pink wine, is the Barraquino Vangri 2019. So... Again, Vangri translates into gray wine. So you have Noir, which is black. You have Blanc, which is white. In between is gray, hence Vangri, gray wine. So this is a small little winery that I happen to love. Specifically, their Malvasia Bianca, which is a dry, highly aromatic white wine. But this is their pink wine. And every vintage, I've noticed, the grape mix changes depending on what they choose is appropriate for that particular harvest. Normally, it's more Senso based out of Lodi, but this time it's more Grenache based, and it's out of Monterey. So it's 55% Grenache, 29% Mourvedre, 8% Roll or Vermentino, and then it's 8% Senso. Okay, and it's made whole cluster press.
Co-fermented?
No, they wouldn't do it whole cluster. I mean, they wouldn't co-ferment it. I don't know, but maybe this vintage they did. Doesn't taste co-fermented, but it's just meant to be a Mediterranean-esque rosé. I've been looking for this wine for a long time, and I finally found it at our field, Aina Haina.
Okay.
So, given his dish, I was specifically looking for a certain type of rosé. And this is one of them. I went to all these stores looking for the right rosé. This is the one I found. And I'm so thrilled that we were able to get some of this wine for tonight's thing. You'll see how fresh and how unbitter and how it's a little warm now, but I mean, when it came out, I thought it was an amazing pairing. Okay, the second wine that in the middle glass, this is the Côte de Rhône blended by Kermit Lynch 2017. So this is one of Kermit Lynch's private cuvées that he calls Cypress Cuvée, 2017. So this is a light Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, Cinsault based country-styled wine, not serious, not heavy, but light and delicious and food-friendly and gulpable. I thought this was a really important wine to showcase tonight because not only should it go with the food in a more cafe or bistro or country-style manner, but I found this at Fujioka's at $11.99.
That's a steal. That's
in
unreal.
this day and age, $11.99. So I grabbed some, and I just wanted to make sure that we tried it with this dish because I think that's an incredible value.
That's awesome.
Okay, and then the final wine, we did a little blind tasting with this at another earlier shoot. So the grape variety here is called Frappato, and this is from Namfro. This comes from Sicily. This is a very aromatic red. It has a lot of floral nuances. She says violet. Some people say lavender. I think it's got a little rose petalness inside of it all. Still with a very savory core. I thought it'd be fun for us to try an aromatic red because of the dash of cinnamon that's inside here, as well as the upliftingness of the orange zest. So I thought this would be an interesting pairing. So that's the 3 wines that we're going to try with this particular dish. So your thoughts, Ariana, of the 3? Maybe you talk about the dish with all 3, what works, what doesn't work.
Absolutely. So right off the bat, I already took a bite with the rosé, and for me, I know you said the orange zest specifically for the Frappato, but I'm just getting this really nice springiness of the orange zest with the rosé. And, not a lot of people, especially here in Hawaii, were like, oh, beef, gotta do red. But I think this is a really cool alternative because it's not better or worse, but it's just a different take on what pairs with something this hearty, because it's the kind of wine that's going to make you keep eating because it's just washing it back. It has a little bit of that springiness, but also that savory quality of rosé. I think we've talked about this before. Not all rosés are the same. Chuck said he ventured far and wide for a particular rosé. I think this one has just enough heft without it being bitter, without it being too heavy. It's still nice and light enough to actually pair with the dish, but can also stand up to it on its own. So I think that's really important, that balance.
Okay, so before we move on to the next one, I'd like to hear Michael's comment about this rosé with the particular dish. And if you don't like it or you don't agree, it's cool. This is just a subjective look from each person's point of view. And so maybe it makes the viewer think of different things, different possibilities.
Well, I think that my favorite thing about this wine with this food is that it sweeps the palate. Like the beef stew is really on your palate, it's clinging and it coats it, and then you try this wine and it has just enough kind of body to it to kind of really cleanse it. So you find that, for me, like in the middle of your palate, in the middle of your tongue, and when you swallow it, it refreshes the mouth. Mm-hmm. I do think there's a touch of bitterness, which actually I really like with this dish. I think a little bit of tannins here that you sometimes can find in vin gris works really well with this context.
It actually works with the carrot a little bit too. Yeah,
I tried it with the parsnip, which has that kind of nuttiness to it. But I really like the way it works with the cinnamon in kind of a weird way. I think the cinnamon is such like a kind of a bass tone thing, and when you link that with a little bit of that orange zest, and you have a rosé with that, between the 2 compounds in the food and that in the wine, it's a very different kind of experience that you wouldn't necessarily think on your feet to be the first go-to, but it works really well.
Yeah, love those.
For me, I think this is an incredibly dynamic pairing. Mm-hmm. I think it just, beef stew, I look at it as warming and everything during cold nights and, cold weather. Very warming, it's very satiating, it's very, like that, but, a lot of stews can have like a glutinous kind of thing, a rich thing. That's why a lot of people will throw gremolata, or in your case, cinnamon and orange zest to kind of like perk it up, so it's not your first or second bite. I'm talking about your 6th, 7th, 8th bite where it gets to be, oh God, I'm full and all that stuff. This thing just keeps it fresh and dynamic and just, it's a pleasure to eat and drink together. It's just very uplifting between bites. But I have to add, you have to be very, very specific in looking for the rosé. Too many rosés are too bitter for this dish, or too alcoholic, or too much this. You have to have something that's light like this, something that's an orchestra of different grapes and therefore different fruit nuances, as well as a little bit of stoniness, mineral that you get in this wine. But it's got to be more an uplifting style of rosé.
Some acidity to it as well.
Yeah, exactly. That connects with the orange rind of this thing. It's wonderful, So, I was looking for all these different rosés, and it was just crazy that to find style like this, one that's made like this. So, Ariana, let's talk about wine number 2. You start off.
So for me, none of the wines are heavy. I would like to emphasize that. But with that in mind, I would say the wine in the center is a little bit more of that base note body comparatively, simply comparatively. So with that being said, that's my like go-to when I have that big chunk of beef and I'm just like having that really, really meaty savoriness, because I think that this wine naturally has like a cracked black pepper. It naturally has a little bit more of a meatiness to the wine itself. That's the go-to for me when I have that really big bite of meat.
Okay, Michael?
I think when I naturally was making this dish, all I wanted to drink with it was Southern Rhone. I think just between the garrigue, a lot of the natural herbs that we have in the stew that are growing amongst the vines in the region, I think is really important. But that base tones in the wine, I think, comes out a little bit, like you were talking about with a bite of the beef. You want something a little bit more heavier, something to go toe to toe with it. But I think that this wine is just uplifting, but it's also really mineral. Like there's a lot of minerality to it, and I think it's its backbone. And I think I love that with the mushrooms in here.
I also got a little bit more with the bacon too, and there's like a very specific like meaty, savory salinity that goes with this one too.
And the olive. I know there wasn't much olives in there, but after being braised for 4 days, they're not super strong. But when you get a little bit of bite of that, yeah.
So to me, this represents a very light, delicious country-style wine. You know, it's not heavy, it's not tannic. You know, it's very uplifting in a certain way, in that you can just gulp this wine. You don't have to think about it. You know, it doesn't, the tannins don't barrage your
and for
palate.
$11.99 a bottle, feel free to gulp it. You can get a second.
But even besides that, I just like the fact that this is just gulpable. You know, you have to feel guilty, but more importantly, it's not overpowering. It doesn't pound your palate. It's just light and quaffable and delicious, right? And so I think that this thing, I love the grenache-ness of it, especially when it warms up like this. When these wines were colder, it was a different dynamic with the foods, but as it's warmed up, the grenache really comes out in this wine in terms of it's more juicy, it's more fruity, it's more peppery, it's more, rounder. It's not so severe. That's what I love about this wine. So to me, this wine is delicious to wash down this particular dish. And it's satisfying because it's got a little bit of tannins, a little bit of acid that keeps your palate fresh and alive. I think it's a wonderful opportunity with this dish. So, although we gave some thought as to what to select with it, I mean, I think both of these first two wines add a lot of different dimension to wine and food.
And two different tastes, yeah. Very cool, because they both work in different ways.
I think it's wonderful. Okay, so Michael, we'll start with you now on wine number 3, and then we'll go to Ariana.
Well, wine number 3 is insanely
you love this wine.
Aromatic.
Yeah.
I really do like it. There's a lot going on with it, and it was interesting to see 1, 2 first, and then you hit 3, and then it's almost like your nose is aware of it 6 inches away from the glass. And it's really kind of a striking comparison between the two. But what I like the most about this is its headiness to it. It's so much more vibrant. And when you have this high tone treble versus the base of the dish, I think when you find the mix between the two is really when they can have a conversation of when they're really beginning to work with each other. Also, just being from Sicily, it's such like an old school area to grow. A lot of these people, a lot of these dishes are built in that way and has been done the same way for as long as they've been growing wines in this region. So there's kind of a cool cultural aspect to the link between these two wines and all of these wines, honestly, because the same with the Southern Rhone and the same with the Vin Gris. It's very different approaches. We have kind of high tone, and then you have base, and then you have a little bit of both in this last wine. But it's really vibrant. I really like how it cleanses the nose. I think like beef stew can be so, like you were saying earlier, 7 bites in, you're like, that's it. But when you have a wine like this, it refreshes.
It's not exhausting. It's like, let's keep going.
I also think psychologically it has a big thing to do with it too. When you have something that's completely different and completely more moving in terms of your organoleptic response, how your nose smells, how your taste buds work. I think when you have a wine that's uplifting like this, it's
super important.
It's worth its weight in gold when it comes to
It's very aromatic, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Ariana, your thoughts?
I think Mike definitely hit all those points there, but also I would like to add on to that is that this wine also has like a very slight herbaceousness to it that I think we've seen when Mike was explaining a little bit of like the herbs that went into this as well.
For me, it's the thyme.
The thyme, yeah. I think that
It's about time.
it's about time. There it is. We were waiting for another Chuck joke. But I think being that this is Italian wine, it has that savoriness that goes with it, has that really nice, almost like dried thyme flavor or fresh thyme flavor that you see in the dish itself. So it's complementary for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just love the aromatics of this wine. By the way, the grape variety is called Frappato. It's from Sicily. It's specifically from Vittoria, which is southwest Sicily, about 3/4 of the way down. I bought this at Our Field Wine Company in Kailua, and I think I paid $22.59 a bottle. So
Not
I look
58, not 60, 59.
That's Kitito. So I've looked for Frappato for many, many years. The three most interesting indigenous red grapes to Sicily include Nero d'Avola, Norello Mascalese, and then Frappato. But it was the hardest for me to find an interesting Frappato. So
Very awesome.
many years ago, I ran across Namfro. We don't get it every vintage, but when I was so happy to see it at Our Field in Kailua, that's why I bought it, because I love the aromatics and how the aromatics of this wine creates a very different dynamic with foods, and specifically works well because you have a little bit of cinnamon here, you have a little bit of orange zest here. I think creates an incredible dynamic. There's a lot of tension there. I think it's pretty darn good, the pairings. And I have to also add to this point is that not all beef stews are the same. Just like not all rosés are the same, not all beef stews, not all braised foods are the same.
And they will change over time.
And very good. And I think that hopefully Cully and Courtney can list a recipe for you all, and then so that you guys can have an idea of how to make this at home. But Mike's approach to me is very wine savvy. He doesn't add a lot of things, and he doesn't include like things like vinegar and things like that other people might include that make it less wine friendly. This thing is just purely about meat with a little bit of upliftment from the cinnamon, a little bit of upliftingness from the orange zest. You have the carrots, you have the parsnip, root vegetables, savory kind of vegetables. I think it's a very smartly constructed dish, specifically a takeoff from Julia Childs to go with these wines. Now, I don't know if all three of these wines are actually 100% perfect with the food, but it's a great start. And we struck it kind of lucky because pairing wines and foods can be a very challenging thing. But this was a great base and core to work from, in my opinion, and providing this exercise, of a rosé with braised foods, a lighter country-style gulpable wine with braised beef, and finally a more aromatic red with the braised meat that creates a different dynamic because of the cinnamon and the orange zest.
And we all accentuate different things about it.
Yeah.
So it can really be a focal point of what you're trying to accentuate.
It's like taking different color highlighters and like highlighting different points.
But that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, we were talking about my wife and how she cooks different things. So she made
Tinkers,
bolognese.
She
with
made a
one
beef
sauce.
stew too.
Yeah, with one wine. And then the second batch she made with a different wine. It's amazing the difference. So she constantly tinkers and it creates different dynamics that you can have fun with, especially when pairing with wines. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely.
100%.
Especially when you're getting something for $11.99 a bottle that you can feel comfortable that, okay, I'm going to just spritz a little bit on here, and still have a lot to drink later on. That's perfect.
Yeah. So, Michael, any closing comments for you?
I think the big thing for me is to really understand the dynamics of your approach, right? Like, what do we want to accentuate the most? What do we want to go forward with?
And different times, different places, different people, right? Yeah.
And if you're the one making the food, I would say there's a probably likely chance that you're the one buying the wine for whatever event or dinner you're making. So it's an interesting thing to think about when you're planning this out and you want to have a good bottle to drink with what you're making, is to really think about what have I had that I like? What accentuates my style of palate? I mean, we have the luxury of working with chefs, but when you are the chef, you can have.
That's almost even more liberating, right? Because you can have full control of the canvas.
Yes, that's one thought, one approach to it.
Canvas? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Ariana,
Or the plastic plate.
Ariana, your closing thoughts?
I just really want to highlight or emphasize or accentuate here, which is the fact that the food and the wine have a conversation. You've used that term with us before, and I think it's super, super important to drive home. I actually want to pose this as a question to you in terms of why is it important for the wine and food to speak to each other, especially when you're at home, you're hosting dinner, you're the chef, but you're also your own sommelier. Why is it important to think about it in terms of wine and food together, not separately?
You got to look at wine as a food.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, when you have one in your palate, like if you're chewing, right, and you're drinking separately, when you're chewing and drinking at the same time, they are now one unit. So I think you really need to focus on the fact that having a dinner or pairing a wine or making dinner for your family is fundamental between both sides of it, right? So
yeah, it's like what sides are you going to add?
Exactly.
The sides have to kind of intermingle and work with the main course or the main featured dish, right? It's the same thought. That's what he's saying.
If you're doing a vinaigrette, like how much vinegar are you using?
Yeah.
Or what type of dressing are you doing? Are you doing a salad? What's your protein? You're doing a protein with a salad. There's all these different things that you think about. Like you've seen and we've gone over wines in a blind tasting format, and we go through these wines in a fundamental way, right? If you approach that way with food in the same context, then you have the same exact way of analyzing a dish, the same way we analyze a wine. Maybe substitute tannin for fat. Acidity stays the same. Absolutely.
I think
Sweetness for savoriness.
a simple metaphor for people at home is you wouldn't serve your family Alfredo and Bolognese and say, oh yeah, they're the same pasta, basically the same thing. Why are we thinking it that way with wines? You know, there's so much variety. Not all rosés are the same. Not all grenaches are the same. So why don't we just put that little bit of extra thought into thinking about what is actually going to pair with what we have on the table, right?
But I think most importantly is what you like.
Yeah.
What is good for you? What is good wine to you, and what is good wine that your friends like or your family likes, or you know, I think that's important too, is to really analyze what you like to eat and drink. That is the most important part, because you can change you can change anything about any of that. But when you begin to realize, oh, I tend to like a Southern French reds, well, maybe we can start playing around with dishes from that region.
Yeah, and work hand in hand together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so we chose Julia Child, who's arguably one of the most venerated old school chefs. She brought food to the household for decades.
I think the awesome thing too is, yes, I like, you know, Southern French style cooking. You don't need to venture far. We all have Google, and there's hundreds of years of recipes already out there that we can play
There's
with.
Thousands of years.
Yeah,
Read
exactly.
Apicius, right?
Exactly.
Well, but let me say this though. I think the other thing that we need to think about from this exercise is, you know, if you're coming up with the dish itself, and if you're seeking balance in your dish, so it's not too glutinous, or that it's not too meaty, or it's not too oily, or it's not, if you're seeking balance between acid, fat, and all that stuff in your food, then what he's saying is that, well, you need to also seek balance with the side dishes that go with it. But you also need to seek balance with the wine that you're pairing with it when you're coming up with the dish. Then you're setting your wine and food pairing up to succeed by doing that. It's just like you're setting up your side dishes. You know, it's got to be cohesive. That's what he's saying that he looks to do in coming up with a specific dish. And I think it shows that we chose 3 wines, and look how surprisingly friendly they are with each wine for different reasons. That's because the dish is balanced, first of all, and it's got nuance of this and that. Just like the wines are all balanced. They're like a tree, no branches sticking out. You know, so balanced wines, balanced food, and they kind of like, it's better set up to work together.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think that's the point of the story. And Michael, I'd like to thank you also for you taking the time.
Yes,
And
he
sharing not
crafted
only
this with love.
not only your wine knowledge, but you taking the time of days of putting this dish together so that it would be ideal with all the different wines that we're doing, et cetera. And you're coming here to share your skills and your insights, your experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And I hope for all of you, it provides you a lot of things to think about more, different horizons, new horizons in your pursuit for enjoying wines, but now maybe wine and food. So guys, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much, Ariana.
Absolutely.
Thank you to all of you for watching. Stay tuned next week. We'll be back. Aloha, everybody.